Hey everyone, it's Carissa Wiley from sprinkledwithglitter.com. Thanks for joining me today. Today I am sharing a super fun project. This is a string art card, and I created this card using the brand new Essential Stitching dies from the Essentials by Ellen line. Here is a look at these dies, and I kind of wanted to talk to you a little bit about the uniqueness of these dies and how they coordinate with the already existing Essential Shape dies. Now, each of these sets of dies comes with 2 sheets of dies. There's a lot of dies in all of these packages. And these dies only cut the stitching holes in this shape. So it doesn't cut an outline, but these coordinate perfectly with the existing Essential Shape dies. So you can either add an outline or you can just use them to add some fun accents to your project. So here's a look at how they coordinate with the Essential Shape dies. You can either use a larger one and have the stitching dies in the center of that shape, or you can cut a window in the center of your shape using a smaller Essential Shape die. Now, I had a lot of fun playing with these dies and created several projects for the Essentials by Ellen monthly newsletter. It is sharing 4 ways to use these essential stitching dies. So if you want to check that out, you can. Today, I wanted to go into a little more detail about the string art card that I created for that newsletter project. And I'm going to be using the essential rectangles and the essential stitching rectangles. Now, here's a look at half of the ovals that are kind of nested inside the essential ovals. So I just wanted to show you how well they really nest inside of the existing shapes. I am taking an essential rectangle stitching die, and nestled inside of it, I have one of the essential rectangle dies. These are all available exclusively at ellenhudson.com. And I'm going to hold them together using a piece of purple tape. Now I'm going to take this grouping of dies that I have held together, and I am going to hold it in place onto a piece of cardstock. It's a heavyweight cardstock, cut to about 3 3/4 by 5 inches. I have 2 of those pieces, and I'm going to stack both of those card front pieces up together and run them both through my die cut machine at the same time with this grouping of dies on top. So to make sure that I get a good solid impression on my second layer, because this is a heavyweight cardstock I'm using, I'm going to add my metal shim to my regular die cutting sandwich and run this through my Gemini Junior. Now the first layer cut beautifully. The second layer, it did not cut all the way through, and I wasn't expecting it to, but I have this great impression that then I can take this grouping of dies, I can remove this center piece, and I can save that for another project. I'm going to keep the dies connected together and kind of nestle them into that place where they impressed into that card front and adhere it on. And now I'm taking my A2 top folding card base, and I'm going to layer that behind this second card front, and I'm going to run this through my die cut machine again. So this time I'm going to cut all the way through that second card front, and I'm going to press the design into the card base. Now I'm not going to actually be stitching on the card base itself, so I just need a window in this card base. So I've pressed that design in. I know where my window lines up on my card fronts, and I'm going to remove that outer die, which is the stitching die, and I'm going to place just this essential rectangle die into that groove that's already been created by running those 2 layers through. And then I'm going to run this through my die cut machine again. So what I'm left with is a card base that has a rectangle size window that is the same size as the rectangle windows on my 2 stitching panels that I created. Now I created 2 stitching panels because I really wanted to create a solid base for all of my string art that I'm going to be doing. So I'm going to show you that in a minute here. I'm going to adhere those together. Now, when this is finished, the string art will be suspended in that window, and you'll see through to the inside of the card, which I think is a really fun design. Now I have several colors of DMC floss here. These are all available at ellenhudson.com, and they coordinate beautifully with the Essentials by Ellen felt that's available there. And I had these on hand, and so I picked some really bright festive colors, and I'm going to cut off links of each of these colors of floss, and I'm going to pre-thread a whole bunch of needles. This is probably not necessary. But I just wanted to be prepared. I was going into a Zoom meeting and I was planning on doing the string art while I was in the Zoom meeting, so I wanted to have that all done. So now I have some Honeybee liquid adhesive and I'm running it around the outside of those stitching lines and along the inside of those stitching holes as well. And I'm going to adhere these two frame panels together to make a really nice sturdy base for all of the string art that I'm creating. Now, truth be told, I could have probably used an additional layer on this, but I did want to make sure that it was a little bit sturdy. I'm glad I went with two. One I think would have been too thin, but I definitely think a third would have benefited me as well, because you'll see in a minute here when I finish up my stitching, it did kind of curve a little bit. So two things to prevent that from happening would be add an additional layer and also make sure that you're not pulling your string too tight when you do your string art. Now you probably just saw me add 2 lines of Be Creative tape along the back edges of my stitching frame here. And that's so that I have a place to kind of anchor my different colors of flosses. So I'm just peeling back the backer just a little bit to expose that adhesive and kind of pressing the end of my floss into that adhesive to hold it in place while I add my string to this frame. Now, because there's all of these holes already created, this makes this process really easy. I started out with a lighter piece of floss here, and I'm just kind of creating angles here. I'm going to allow these to kind of go across the card. I'm going to allow them to overlap at times. And I didn't have like a set plan in mind when I went to create this. So I think if I were to try to create it again, it probably would turn out a little bit different. But I think that's the beauty of these. They're all going to be really unique. Now you can see I'll thread my needle up through one of those holes and kind of pull the string into different directions to see where I want this to end up. And I did find that rather than going, once I go down through the card on one side, I'm going to come up right next to it to go across the card. If you keep the thread underneath and come up through the back side across the card, those layers kind of get hidden behind the top layers. So once I'm done with a color of floss, I'm going to pull back the backer on the adhesive and adhere the end of that floss into the adhesive and then replace the backer over the adhesive once again, and then I can trim that off and move on to my next color. Now, I know that there are probably plenty of you who don't really necessarily like to stitch or cross stitch on cards, but I have to tell you, this is a completely different process, at least in my mind. Instead of creating lots of little X's or back stitches or something like that, this really is about creating a really cool and funky piece of art. So you can see I've moved on to a darker color pink, and then I have some orange floss, I have some really bright green floss, some more Kelly green floss, a little bit of turquoise, and also a really light blue. And by the way, I will have all of these floss colors linked in the YouTube description below or over on my blog at sprinkledwithglitter.com. So if you're looking for the specific colors that I used, be sure to check that description out. Now, once I'm done with all of my colors, I can once again end it by just pressing the end of that floss into the adhesive and then covering the adhesive back up. I don't want this sticking to my surface. That adhesive on the back edges of this card front or this frame is really just to keep these ends in place, and then I can trim it down. Now you can leave it like this, and you can see it's a little bit curled up, which is why I told you earlier I could have probably benefited from a third layer or from just not pulling my strings as tight, but I still think it's beautiful. But I decided I wanted to cover up those holes. So I cut one more card front. This measures 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. I cut that using the same rectangle die that I used to create the window on the front of my card base, as well as these card fronts. And I'm going to adhere it directly over that string art piece that I created. Now, you don't have to cover up those holes. I think they look absolutely fine. And keep in mind, when you're creating your string art, you don't have to fill every single one of those holes, especially if you're going to cover them up. You can skip some holes and allow some more open space in your design if you want. I just kind of went for it, and this is what I came up with, and I absolutely love the way this card turned out. So I adhered that on using some more Be Creative tape. And now I'm going to flip that over. I'm going to remove the backer to the Be Creative tape that was holding my floss ends in place. And I'm going to sandwich those floss ends between that Be Creative tape and a layer of foam adhesive. Now, this foam adhesive is what's going to adhere it onto my card base. And I'm going to adhere that right directly over the window that I created in my card base so that this string art will kind of be suspended in the middle of all of this. Now, in order to line that up, I brought in a piece of black cardstock so I could make sure that my windows were perfectly aligned, and I'm holding it up to make sure that I have everything on there straight and that I like it. And then once I'm sure that it's in the right place, I'm going to flip it over and just press that foam adhesive from the back side so that I make sure it adheres to my card base really well. And that is my string art card. It is so much fun to do. I completed this card by adding some hello sentiments. This is the big scripty hello die from the Essentials by Ellen line, and I just stacked up about 3 or 4 layers of that, and I adhered it using some dots of liquid adhesive right over the string and onto the card frame base there. And I added a few sparkling clear sequins as well to add a little bit of shimmer and shine. I love this card. I don't even know if I can part with it. And I had such a great time making it as well. As always, I will have links to the featured products used in this project in the description at YouTube. So if you're looking for something in particular, be sure you check there. Or you can head on over to my blog at sprinkledwithglitter.com. I will have that linked below. Over there, you'll find more still shots, more information, and a complete list of supplies. As always, thanks for stopping by. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this project. If you did, be sure to give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notifications here on my YouTube channel so you won't miss any of my paper crafting and card making video tutorials. And if you enjoyed this video, I would also love it if you would share it with a friend. Once again, thanks for stopping by and hanging out with me today. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day.